So, hello, everyone. My name is Megan Clark, and I would like to welcome you to the webinar titled ACES, A Cross-Cultural Perspective, Decolonizing Strategies for Enriching Frontline Programs, Services, and Their Policies. Just a few housekeeping things I want to mention so I don't forget is that this webinar will be recorded. So it's being recorded and it will be available within a couple days to a week on our website. And if you have questions, it would be great if you could put them into the question part of the webinar, the Q&A. We will be monitoring both the chat and the Q&A, but it'll be easier for us to get to the questions at the end if you put them in the Q&A. So thank you for joining us today. And I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute is hosting this webinar today from Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. As an organization, we reaffirm our responsibilities and commitments to healthy relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And we are committed to understanding the history and ongoing impact of colonialism and playing a part in disrupting the harm in our work and personal lives. So this webinar is a part of a series organized by the Early Childhood team of the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute. And the Prevention Institute is a provincial nonprofit organization that works to reduce the occurrence of disabling conditions in children. And our mandate is to help all children thrive through primary prevention and the promotion of well-being. And the Early Childhood team is made of staff of the Institute whose work focuses in early childhood. And the goal of the Early Childhood team is to enhance early childhood well-being so children have healthy relationships and opportunities to develop and thrive to their potential. So if you would like to learn more about the Early Childhood team or the Prevention Institute, I encourage you to check out our website, which is very rich with information. And so we are pleased to welcome our two presenters today, Diana Elliott and Sherry Sinclair. And both Diana and Sherry live and work in British Columbia. And this session will be a reflective conversation about ACEs, or Adverse Childhood Experiences, which evolved from separate research in 1998 and from frontline workers and their experiences. But as I don't want to take up more of their presenting time, I won't go into further detail about their extensive experience. But if you would like to know more about the presenters, you can find their bios on our website along with a description of this webinar. And I believe that we're going to be placing a link to that in the chat, so you can look for it there. But with no further ado, Sherry and Diana, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. It's really good to be here. I know Diana's computer has been a bit troublesome this morning. There we are.
There, my mute is off. I might just leave it on right now. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you, and Sherry, and I appreciate the invite, and just acknowledging that I'm zooming in from my home office in the Coast Salish territory of Cowichan tribes, where I'm from. So I look forward to the next hour or so with you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And my name is Sherry Sinclair, and I'm joining you today from the unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, who are caretakers of the land, caretakers of the air, and caretakers of the waters for thousands of years. I am a settler in Canada. I have roots in Northern Ireland on my mom's side and on the UK on my dad's side. So this means that my ancestors were colonized, and then they became the colonizers, and they settled in Ontario. So I'm a mom and a grandma and a wife and an auntie and a sister and a daughter and a friend. We have 3 adult children, and we all live within an hour of each other here close to Vancouver, and really grateful to be alive at this time, this junction in Canada, as Canada's beginning to work towards truth and reconciliation. So today we are, some of our learning objectives, briefly, where we want to talk about ACES and that context matters, talking about the practitioner and to reflect on our own journey, and then agency, where you're working, so policy, the TRC, under it, and how do we put these into practice, and then we'll have questions. That's our goal anyways, is to have time for questions. Yeah, so I'm going to start. And just give me a second, because we're going to, whoops, that's not, here we go. Give me a sec. All right, so welcome to this section of the webinar. Part of this is going to be an overview of ACES, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and PACES, the Protective Positive Childhood Experiences. So this particular slide, I'm going to read from the website where this came from, and I can give you that link later on. This says a pair of ACES tree illustrates the relationship between adverse childhood experiences experienced at the individual level within a family and adverse community environments. The pair of ACES tree communicates, in simple terms, the issues we aim to address. By doing so, we are able to engage diverse stakeholders in developing policy goals that support efforts to address adversity rooted in communities and systems. So if you define the word colonization with this definition, the dominant culture that burdens society to conform to its way only, you can see how this diagram may be perceived as colonizing, as the very well-intended researchers start off with solving the problem by separating out the individual from their family and community. Then they apply back a framework to recreate family and community through stakeholders and policies. The underlying systemic poverty and racism that colonization created in the first place remains untouched. That's from the pair of ACES tree, LSW, Dietz W, and Chen in 2022. So from that colonized lens, here's a thumbnail of where ACES came from and the follow-up PACES. So you probably already know this. This is really skim. 1995, Dr. Vince Folletti, he's an endocrinologist, very nice man, and Dr. Robert Anda, he's now passed away, cardiovascular. They led a study for 15 years for over 17,000 participants. The average age was 57. They were educated. They all had healthcare insurance. Half was men, half was women, and 75% were Euro-American, all living in San Diego. So already the test group is a little bit different than how we are using that test today. So this study involved a physical exam and answering 10 questions from childhood. The categories broadly were abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. So on this interesting research journey, researchers were wondering, why are some people doing well in spite of a high ACE score, which is the terminology that came out of how many ACEs do you have, right? I got 4 out of 10, that sort of thing. So the emerging research showed how resilient our brains and our bodies are with the presence of protective factors or positive experiences. So here's some protective factors that can change the impact of trauma. So think of where these protective factors happen in Indigenous communities. Just keep that, think about that. So the factors would be parent caregiver resilience and knowledge. So parents who can cope and understand with their child's development, positive parenting strategies, and their own responses to trauma. Nurturing and attachment. So supporting their child through loving relationships and being attuned to their needs. Social connections, friends, families, neighborhoods, community. You have a place you belong to. Basic needs, having food, shelter, clothing, and healthcare. And then social emotional needs, where kids and parents are being able to manage emotions and share feelings. So this slide, I'm hoping some of you will recognize it. This was from the April 25 Saskatchewan Prevention Institute webinar with Erin Beckwell. It was a great webinar. So this is another way to look at a cup filler or a cup spiller. So where's your positive experience? Where's your negative experience? So adversity is only one part of the equation. You need to explore resiliency and think about that. And strength-based approach is the piece that tips the scale toward promoting positive outcomes for a young person who's faced with adversity or toxic stress. There's a website called the Center for the Study of Social Policy, and they have the Strengthening Families approach. They're out of Washington, D.C. And if you aren't aware of that website, I would recommend that you look it up. There was a recent study in March 2022, which is excellent. Systemically neglected: how racism structures public systems to produce child neglect. And so they've got a whole host of resources. They're free on that website, the Center for the Study of Social Policy. I'd recommend that one. So now looking at programs and their delivery. I'm hoping that you know what a family resource program is, or a family place, or a drop-in center. So knowing why we're working, like why are we delivering these programs? So we need to be committed to that underlying why. And the why here is to support families to be the best, how they want to be. And then you follow that with the how of the work, the approach. And in these points here, you'll see that relationship is key to the work. So the how you hold the family is critical. So if you view the family as an asset and resource for both the program and the community. And the practitioner embodies, after we embody the how or the approach, then the what, what are we going to do? Then the what can happen. If we skip over why and how, it can leave families feeling unseen, unheard, and unempowered. And again, the goal is to empower families to be their best selves as they see it. And family resource program practitioners practice instrumental help giving and intentional relationship building. So there's a document that will be shared after, and I've put some excerpts from a report on promising practices called On the Ground in the Field. It's from 2013, but it's gold, absolute gold. So there's all kinds of practical ideas in there, and all grounded in the research from family resource practitioners. So I'm excited that you can see that. Glad that we can still have those pieces of research. So regardless if the families that you work with have high ACES or high PACES, there's baskets of ways that a practitioner's gesture of care can support the family and build connections with the family. Keep in mind, like, we're all human and relationships take time, so we can invite participants to engage at their pace. And this demonstrates respect and acceptance that's witnessed by the person receiving the respect, and that's also witnessed by everyone else who's attending the program. Your practice nurtures the culture in the program or the service. So I've sandwiched these points between the warmly greet hello and the say goodbye to each family, because it's really heart touching when you go somewhere and someone notices that you're there. Hey, now even if you are busy with someone else and you notice someone come in, you can always do the universal eyebrow flash, right? And they know you've seen them. You can say, just a minute, I'll be right there. And then the goodbye. I've watched people who have left a party or left an event, and they're looking to see if anyone's going to notice that they're leaving. And so if you do, just, see you next time. And it just means that this was their place, they belong there. And the last thing I want to say on this slide is leave spaces for pause. Because when you do that, like, we give people space to breathe. When we're a delivering program and we're having community engagement, like, it's a courtship and we're wandering down the path together. And the giving some space to breathe, it helps trust to develop. So in consideration of your practice and your expectations and what you're doing, how you're doing it, Dr. Erica Cheng's slide might be helpful. So the broad aims, just in the middle of the slide there, she's got 4, and that's to move past the cycle of trauma, interact well and appropriately with their child, maintain a job, and keep healthy and well. These are lifelong aims, and sometimes it is 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but we are here for the long game, #long game, because relationships are for the long game. And you think about, how can our practice enhance what the participants are experiencing and to sustain their growth. And when you do get the slides, Dr. Erica Cheng's name here, that is, you can click on that. And here's the book that Dr. Erica Cheng, she's a MD out of Bella Coola in BC, working in the emergency department. She worked with Sandra Weiland. Sandra has passed away, but in this book, they created a Beyond the Cycle of Trauma Institute. Again, you can go onto that website. The book's available on Amazon. There's great resources here. You could put a whole training together for your team. As well, Dr. Erica Cheng has a training that you could access through her. So let's move now to a personal horizon. So quoting Chief Dr. Robert Joseph, our future and the well-being of all our children rests with the kind of relationships we build today. And this includes the relationship with ourselves. So what about my story and my ACES and my PACES and my road and my healing journey? You know, broadly speaking, when I experience or we experience harm or hurt, if I don't identify the truth of the injury, how can I reconcile that injury? I think about when I've been lied to, cheated on, physically or otherwise injured, rejected, ignored, disrespected. So how can I walk down a road towards reconciliation? So my question is, can I release the debt that's owed me? Can I release that? Can I let go? Can I forgive? Even if I don't hear an apology. The way I see it, forgiveness is for my benefit and my healing, and it helps me move along on that road to reconciliation. There's a whole lot more in there. I don't want to, this webinar isn't about that part, but for those of you who are in those fields, you know that there's much more that would go on to complete our healing. So what helps you on your healing journey? Humor, generous spirit, because suffering's common to us all, small ways and some very, very big unjust ways. Injustice speaks a similar language, and as we pursue our healing journey, I encourage us to be open and face the truth and be honest, tell the truth and release the debt that's owed. Getting in touch with our own healing journey can help us have empathy for others and for those who live in the face of current and past inhumane racist environments. Reconciliation is like a river. It's always there, and we can go into the river at any time. So thank you for resting here with me and being curious, taking time to consider about our collective healing journey. And I like the saying in life that we're all walking each other home. And I'm really glad we're walking together on this road today. And the last slide has a few references. I attended a recent virtual circle with Harley Eagle called Connecting Indigenous Cultural Safety and Addressing Racism in the Healthcare System. That was through UBC. I have that's what that YouTube link there will click you onto. And then if there's other references that you're looking for, you can get in touch with the folks at the Prevention Institute, or you can email me, or we'll hook us up somehow. So that is the first part of our presentation. And I'm going to do a stop share, and then I'll do a share again because I have Diana's slides today. And then I will, you ready to go, Diana? This is our high-tech system that we've got going here. Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, and I actually had to switch to my phone because my computer froze completely. So now I'm on my phone instead of my big screen.
Right, okay, I'm almost there. Why doesn't
All right.
it work for me now? It doesn't want to make me do presenter view. Oh gosh. Sorry, it's not You can have all that at the top, unfortunately.
Okay,
Or, sorry.
that's
Oh.
okay.
Okay, so you just tell me when you need me to advance the slide.
Yeah,
Any
I
signal
will.
you want to give me will work.
All right, thanks. Okay, thanks again, everyone. I'll try to be quick. I always, sometimes when I'm passionate, I just keep talking and talking. So I'll try to keep my passion to a minimum today. But I just want to acknowledge Sherry as a colleague who invited me to participate today. And Sherry is an example of a non-Indigenous person who has for years now acknowledged and recognized that we have to acknowledge and recognize Indigenous people and where they're at and the truth and reconciliation. So it is actually quite wonderful to present with Sherry today on this topic. I already stated who I was, Diana Elliott. I'm Coast Salish from Cowichan Tribes in Duncan, BC, and Nuu-chulnith from the Hoopichesset First Nation in Port Alberni. I am a daughter of a residential school survivor, a granddaughter, a niece, you name it. I come from generations of residential school survivors and Indian Day school survivors. So my talk today is from our perspective. It's from understanding that we're a minority in our own home country and having to work through that. So when we called it decolonizing strategies for enriching frontline programs and services and their policies, I also want to think of us as decolonizing our thoughts, because we can have all sorts of policies and strategies, but if we don't decolonize our thoughts, it's not going to be very helpful to our work. So where we're at now, when I think about tools, when I think about research, when I think about practice, we have to do that with understanding Indigenous children and families. We have to understand it from a cultural safety perspective. Even right now, the politically correct term, what is the I still have people in my family who call themselves Indians. They're status Indians, they're Native, they're First Nations, they're Aboriginal, they're Indigenous, they're First Peoples. So sometimes it's hard for non-Indigenous people to know what to call us or how to say. But I can tell you from my understanding, it's a generational thing. My mom says she's an Indian because she has to carry a status card that says she's an Indian. And so who we are, here's Canada is 155 years old, but our Indigenous people are time immemorial. I can go back to my Coast Salish roots, thousands and thousands of years. So I just wanted to mention that. Okay, we can go to the next slide. I'm just putting this slide in here. This is Aboriginal Infant Development Programs. This is where I'm from. And this is just acknowledging we can't change yesterday, but I'm hoping the work we do today together will make a difference tomorrow for our Indigenous children and families. So I just wanted to mention that. Okay. I think you can just push the down button. You don't have to scroll. I think, maybe not with PDF. Anyway, so again, this is a lovely photo of a little girl using a drum and being happy and singing at a function. But also to say, Indigenous people, we have wounded leaders, and with wounded leaders, we have wounded nations, we have broken relationships, broken families, broken children, but we're all connected. And today, as we can see, since they found those 215 remains of children's bodies at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, and everything that's happened right up to the Pope's visit yesterday and his apology, that we're families, we're communities, and our families are functioning in a state of multi-generational trauma still in the 21st century. We're using parenting and leadership skills created on the foundation of the residential school legacy and the C-scoop and so many of those other detrimental factors. And Aboriginal children are born with challenges based on the challenges of their parents, their own challenges. And some individuals and families, you will see they are resilient. They are able to stand on their 2 feet. They are able to be proud of who they are. But we're working on that healing journey for that multi-generational and intergenerational trauma that's happened. Okay. So this picture is just a picture I like to show. To me, it showed me what intergenerational trauma might look like. This whole message today about intergenerational, multi-generational trauma, if you can see in the foreground there, the black line of the trees, and in the distance you see some layers of mountains, and then above you see gray clouds, but then you see that strip of blue light in the background. So to me, when we think of trauma and we think of family-centered practice, which Aboriginal Infant Development Programs is, we see the children, the families where they're at in their lives. And sometimes that's not a very comfortable place for us who are working with families. We might be in that foreground of that black place, which makes us uncomfortable, which maybe makes us have a little bit of fear or anxiety working with Indigenous children and families. But the goal is to help them out of that place. The goal is to get them to that light, to get that place of healing and that place of standing on their own 2 feet, being proud and finding some resilience. So that's just a visual for me that I really like. Okay. So I'm just going to talk about the ACES questionnaire related to Indigenous people. So that's just a title page. We can move on. You've seen part of this already in Sherry's presentation, but the thing that's missing for me here, that quote, I like that quote, the one that's on the page now, because many of my own peers have said this exact quote. You could insert any one of my peers and they could have said this. My own father has said this about his father, and he found a place of forgiveness for his father. So that quote just spoke really to me and to so many of our survivors. Okay, next slide. So the thing with the ACES questionnaire, it talks about abuse. It talks about physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. It talks about neglect being physical and emotional. There's so many layers to all of that. And there's so much that I think isn't in that. When we talk about physical, children were starved to death in residential schools. They ate old food. They ate rotten or bad food. They worked in the farms in the residential schools. That's child labor. There's not just the emotional piece, but the mental piece, the spiritual piece, the cultural piece, the learning piece. We weren't learning from our families. We weren't learning our language. And the sexual abuse was just horrendous. And they brought abuses home to their families in the forms of sexual abuse and incest. So there's so many layers to just this that might not be in others, but it is in our Indigenous communities. Okay, next slide. So these are the two questionnaires that I'm familiar with. The one on the left is the one that I did on a couple of folks because I was interested to see what they had to say about it. So that's just showing them to you. I think we can go on to the next slide. So this slide, because so many children were taken away from their families as early as 3, but the average was 4, 5, 6. They were taken away to residential schools. So I asked 2 people this questionnaire in their elderhood, to be honest. And I said, okay, I want you to answer this question from your home life, and gave me all of the answers. So the mother answered all of those questions from her home perspective, and she had 2. The father answered these questions, he had 4, and their daughter had 1, and that's out of 10. So they they answered this completely based on their experiences in the residential school or the Indian day school. So you can see those numbers are low. The fathers was still high, but for the most part, it was low and maybe acceptable. Next slide. There we go. So this is the same questionnaire I asked the mother, the daughter, and the child. And I said, but now I want you to think about it from your experience in the school, not in your home. So I only did the first 6 questions because the other ones were specifically about the households. But you can see that the first 6 questions, the mom got 5 out of 6, the father got 4 out of 6, and the daughter got 1 out of 6. And so the difference when you're thinking about the ACES, especially, or any kind of research or any kind of tool, taking it into perspective of the life and the history of that Indigenous child or adult, or that Indigenous person in general, and their experiences in their childhood, totally different from home and school. And so you can see 7 through 10, I didn't score them on that one because this is all that has happened when the children returned home. This is where intergenerational trauma started. I have witnessed people self-medicate on drugs or alcohol or street drugs. I've witnessed or lost people to suicide in my immediate circle of family and friends. And we know so many people who have gone to prison. And you know, there's so many prisoners who maybe have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder because of the self-medication. And so it goes on and on and on. But I just wanted to actually bring this out because even though it was only on 3 people, it meant a lot to me because this was actually my own mother, my own father, and myself. And AIDP, the Aboriginal Infant Development Programs, actually exists because of the high suicide rates we experienced in the 70s in Cowichan tribes. The elders and the leaders of that time, when we said, what are we going to do with our young adults, our youth who are taking their own lives? And an elder's quote verbatim was, we have to start with the little ones. We have to start with them when they're young, not when they're already 18 and having mental health issues or addictions issues or feelings of loss or not belonging issues. So AIDP exists because of that. And little did we know that 40 years later, from when we started talking about starting with the little ones, that we would still be in the middle of this intergenerational, multi-generational trauma and everything that's happening today that's in the media right now. So while we feel successful, there's so much work to do because we're just in the middle of understanding all of the intergenerational and multi-generational trauma. Okay. So this is just, I wanted to share this because this is the declarations of the rights of the child, any child, not Indigenous, any child. And the preamble speaks for itself. That's the family, that's the group or society that is the best person to raise children. Well, that right was taken away from Indigenous parents. Article 19 states that all state parties will take all appropriate legislative, administration, social, and educational measures to protect the children from all forms of physical and mental violence. Well, that's exactly what the government and the church did to Indigenous people. So the Pope visit yesterday drew so mixed reactions from residential school survivors and their families. People were asking me what I thought about it, and I said, I don't have a thought yet. I don't have an opinion yet. But I visited my mom and I said, Mom, how are you? Because she watched it. And she says, all I ever wanted was for people to believe me. I wanted them just to believe me, everything that happened. And she cried. And so I was asked again this morning, well, what do you think about it? And I said, I don't have any feelings yet. So what it is I haven't felt it in my heart. I think if I feel that apology in my heart, if my mom feels that apology in her heart, that it's going to turn into change or action, I think then we might get somewhere. And again, Indigenous people are at different levels of their own healing journey. Some of them have come a long way, and some of us are just beginning, and some of us are even just fearful of opening up any old wounds again from their experience. Okay, next slide. So I just wanted to say again, when we're thinking about it being decolonizing and decolonizing our minds, finding our way. So the 7 sacred teachings are somewhat across Indigenous cultures. I think we all, and non-Indigenous cultures, that in our way, Indigenous people are finding our way to love and nurture again. We're finding our own culture, beliefs, languages, respecting each other, finding the truth, being humble, being honest, and being courageous. So even Indigenous people, I think, who have been so colonized themselves, we're finding our way back. So I just wanted to kind of stress that. So next slide. This is a teaching of a Shuswap elder from the interior. And I'm going to read it, even though you can read it yourself. Because our people had that strong belief, whatever happened, to keep our family circle strong. With the circle, there is no beginning, no ending. With the family circle, we have the grandparents who are the teachers, the young moms, the young dads, big brothers, big sisters, uncles and aunts and cousins. They're all in the outside circle, and every one of them had an obligation to the little ones. That quote right there was a quote that I took to help us build our AIDP philosophy, because that's what's missing. I know this isn't about residential schools today, but brothers and sisters didn't even know each other when they came back home because they were separated, segregated at residential schools. You didn't know how to be an uncle or an aunt because there was no kids around. So we're really, this was the basis for AIDP, to say this is what we're bringing back to our children and their families, their parents and their elders. Next slide. Again, if we're going to decolonize and sort of decolonizing our thoughts or our minds, this is what respectful relations would look like. Loving and nurturing with relationships with parents or caregiver, friendships with older siblings and cousins, cross-generation interaction. I had so much of that. I had 5 grandmothers and 1 grandfather and great aunts and great uncles. So I was rich in that way in both my nations. The importance of relationships with siblings, cousins, and peers. I have 1 brother with no children, but I am an aunt to so many because we don't remove ourselves. First cousins are raised like siblings. So I have so many nieces and nephews. And again, the importance of just relationships with community and culture. So many rites and so many rites and rituals related to growing and learning. We're bringing back the rites of passage. We're bringing back naming ceremonies. We're bringing back work through games and fun. We're learning about the natural world. We're reintroducing natural foods and natural medicines to our young families through our programs. And we're so bringing back the importance of grandparents and elders and even our ancestors, so that we can become again that loving, nurturing, respectful family for the little ones, in honor of the little ones, especially who were taken away to schools. Okay, next slide. We're not going to talk about cultural safety today, but we have to mention it because that's what's necessary when working with Indigenous children and families. Like I said, whether it's providing a service, a program, doing some research, whatever it is. So this Maori elder, I got this from a Maori elder, and she said, with your basket of knowledge and my basket of knowledge, the people will prosper. So to me, that spoke so well about us working together, that the is all people, not us or not them, but all people. So I just wanted to mention that through my cultural safety. Okay, next slide. I'm not talking about it, but I want to mention it because it's something that's come about in this, especially in the past few years. There's training on it now, there's workshops on it now. Cultural safety in my mind has always fit really well with early childhood development and family-centered practice. Terms that were used before this one were cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity, relevance, differences, cultural knowledge, cultural competence. I actually like cultural knowledge and cultural competence before cultural safety came along, but cultural safety can be all of those that I just mentioned. Okay. So I think when we talk about decolonizing, we have to understand it from the unsafe place of cultural unsafety. So how I know so many times I've been told by my non-Indigenous colleagues that, you know, there's low utilization of programs, there's a denial, they don't comply, they don't show up, they don't use their prescribed therapies, and they're reticent in every interaction that has happened. So we're here today talking about this, about how we can do things different. How can we do things safer? How can we do things more respectfully? How can we engage more positively? How do we support support people where they're at? How do we get the services and supports needed that you provide so that it fits the family, it fits their philosophy, it fits their need? And if we look at the cultural unsafety indicators, then that could help us improve our services and programs. Okay. So other indicators of cultural unsafety, there's my dad. Anger, low self-worth, self-confidence. That is my dad. He just turned 86. He just has never felt worthy. He's never felt good enough. He always felt like the low achiever. He was told he was never going to amount to anything. All he was an Indian, and he was bypassed for promotions so many times at work that he just accepted it. And one day he walked into his boss's office and said, "What's wrong with me? Like, I've been here for this many years. That person was here for this many years. I'm beginning to think you don't value me or want me higher." And in the end, he accepted it when they started to think differently about him, and he did move his way up the ranks before he retired. But at different stages of healing, they're at different stages of self-worth. So when we think about decolonizing or changing our practice or improving or enriching our practices, we have to look at equity, we have to look at equitable services, fairness, regardless of their place in society. So whether they're called a minority or not, or Indigenous or not, we have to think of equity and equitable services and fairness for everyone. Okay. Quickly, this is just what our worldview looks like, an Indigenous worldview. The first slide, mastery, belonging, independence, and generosity, is from Dr. Martin Brokenleg. He has a book, Reclaiming Our Youth, and he talks a lot about all of these four things and what that means. And then, of course, the other side, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. That's another area that we very, very much are focus on. That's part of who we are and our way of being. And in any assessment, developmental assessment or any ACE, spirituality isn't in there. Yet it was religion that did so much damage to us that now that we're here, we're not giving that spiritual context for Indigenous people. So if we did our research, if we did a developmental assessment tool, or if we looked at the ACES again, these are things that, this is how we would frame it or focus it. Okay. Culture. I think some of you will agree that we have Indigenous people who don't speak their language, who don't practice their culture, who don't know their culture. Well, it's because they went away to residential school, they were fostered out to non-Indigenous families, they were displaced from their nation. There's so many reasons, but generations of reasons. So to me, I had someone make me a doll, and this was part of the cake she was making for the doll. And she sent me this picture and said, I'm almost done. So when I looked at that, that to me symbolized that us as Indigenous people who are healing, who are gaining strength, who are gaining confidence and pride in our culture and in ourselves, that we're there, we're building. So we're halfway there. So we acknowledge that we live, work, and play in the same communities, and we have to go through so many things before our relationships are safe and complete, and before our young children can speak our languages, before we lose too many of our fluent speakers in our communities. So I just wanted to acknowledge that some of you will say, well, they don't even know their own language, so why are you talking about that? It's because it was taken away, but it wasn't taken away to the point where we're not trying our hardest to get it back, and that we don't have people who can do that for us. Okay. So there's, as far as generations are concerned, there are so many ways we could address the calls to action, and by bringing attention to everything that might have caused the historical trauma or the loss or the grief or the effects of colonization, the marginalization, the racism, the violence, understanding ways in which trauma has impacted our mental health, and the broader views of identity, community, adaptation, resistance as forms resilience. I'm not brown like my mom and dad and my brother. I have Scottish ancestry, and that little bit of DNA gene pool came out in me. So I was impacted in different ways because of the color of my skin. People did not know I was Indigenous from 2 nations. And sometimes I looked at I did not know I was this color unless I looked in the mirror because of how I was raised. So not everybody has had that. And we need to acknowledge that. And I've said it already, that we have to understand where people are at. We're all at different levels of healing and getting over our grief. My mom and dad started in their 70s. There's some people now that are starting in their 50s and 40s and even 30s. So I just needed to share that generations have experienced things more intensely than other generations, but that intergenerational trauma is there. And I feel it. But I'm thankful both my parents found ways to continue to move forward and grow and find their step. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you. Next one. I know we talk about the 7 generations, but I only have 6 here, and I'm a visual person. So I was just thinking one day when we were talking about my mom's mom, and what she had to endure, what my mom had to endure. So that big trunk, that first one, when we talk about carrying baggage, I pictured my mama having a big trunk of baggage because she spent those years in the residential school, and what she had to overcome. And then my mom's baggage, because of that healing that maybe mama did, or the working so hard to be a good mom to her kids. My mom's baggage was a little bit littler. And by the time she had me at 20, I'm the two suitcases, because I got some baggage, a little bit from my mom and a little bit from my dad. They have different baggage from each other. Like I said, one went to residential school and one went to the Indian day school. My dad didn't get the harshness or the sexual abuse, but definitely the mental and emotional abuse, and cultural abuse. So then I'm the next one on the bottom, the blue one with the wheels, the turquoise one with the wheels. That's me, because I've healed a little bit more than my parents, and I understand where they've come from now. And I understand that maybe, I can count on one hand how many times my dad hugged me, as I grew older. And a kid should be getting at least a hug a day, if not 10. But that was because my mom and dad weren't raised with that physical kind of nurturing. They had hurtful contact to their bodies, not a nurturing one. So they've let go a little bit of that for me. And then the carry-on suitcase is my 2 sons, because I've healed and grown with my parents. And we've been able to move on and let go of even more. And then the little heart-shaped wooden box are my grandkids. I have 3 grandkids. By the time it gets to them, they don't have any of the hardships or the baggage, because it is moving into our history. But in that little box is our resilience in our heart to heal. And then their grandkids, it'll be, my great grandkids, it will be even lighter. So I just use that as a visual, because I just really feel my mama's situation, my mom and dad's situation, but each generation we are healing a little bit more for each generation. Okay. So the next slide, I just want us to think about some considerations when we talk about decolonizing. We want to promote quality, respectful practices and policies. We want consistent programming. We need a range of tools to meet a range of needs. So, you know, one developmental screening tool that works for one family might not work for an Indigenous family or an immigrant family. So we have to have a range of tools for a range of needs. We have to have equality and fairness with program principles, more than just A. We can't just put an A in front of something and call it an Aboriginal program. It has to be Aboriginal created, or at least you know, created for Indigenous families, or with an understanding towards Indigenous families. We didn't take infant development and just put an A in front of it to make it an Aboriginal infant development program. We modeled ourselves after IDP, but we've certainly used our own practices, our own guidelines, our own policies, and created our own way of working with families. And working with Aboriginal families, we're working with generations and communities. We're not just working with a mom and a dad and children. We're working with the generations. We're working with extended family members, and we're working within their community. And then just asking, what does resilience mean? That's a word that's been used a lot in the last few years, and I like the word. My parents have both been so resilient, but do we hide behind that? Like, I don't want us to say, oh well, they can be resilient. I want to not have to be resilient. I want my needs met in a way that I can breathe, that I don't have to work so hard at it. So we can look at resilient from the other side. And then maybe we just start changing our perspectives. Instead of acknowledging our resilience, we need to create a space and opportunity, or the environment, that we don't have to work so hard. So you can help us with that through your programs and services. Okay. So I just, this page is just to say acknowledge and participate. Indigenous Day, Orange Shirt Day, Red Dress Day. If there's a powwow in your community, or some kind of festival that the Indigenous community might be doing, they might be teaching weaving or drumming. So just acknowledge and participate. If it's an open if it's an open event, then you're welcome to go. So I just want to say acknowledge and participate. Okay, next slide. Oh, okay. So, okay, you didn't get the updated version. Okay, so I just wanted to, an artist friend of mine created a piece, and she called Decolonize This. And there's probably 50 or 60 words on her slide. And one of them says programs. So when she says decolonize this, we can decolonize our programs. Memorandums of understanding, we can decolonize this. Rights, reconciliation, services, patriarchy, changing invisible people to invisible people, changing injustice to justice, changing denial to access, changing stereotyping, changing how we apprehend children from their families. Instead of apprehending families, let's strengthen families so they can keep their children. So I wanted to just mention that. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Sherry and Diana. That was great. And I encourage people to ask questions. We have both the Q&A box and the chat option, I believe, are working now. So we encourage people to put questions in there, or if they want to ask questions out loud. Oh, sorry, can you hear me okay? If they want to ask questions out loud, they can raise their hand, and I believe they can be unmuted. So maybe just while people are thinking about questions that they would want to ask, I was just wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit more about the program, the AID. I can't remember exactly what you called it, Diana, but how that is structured to be decolonized, and maybe, you know, to give some ideas or inspiration.
Sure. The Aboriginal Infant Development Program is actually celebrating its 30th anniversary in August. We've got 2 programs that started here on Vancouver Island. Oh, I'm so red. You can see how hot my office is. Two programs. It originated in Cowichan Tribes in Duncan, BC, because, as I mentioned, we had a high youth, young adult suicide rate back in the 70s. I think we had something like about 22 suicides in about 18 months, and some of them were my peers. And they said, what do we do? What do we do? And they said, well, we have to start with the little ones. So they did their own kind of research and found the infant development program, which has been around since the early 70s, and said, oh, we like the home visiting program component. We like the one-on-one. And that's what we used to do. We visited our grandparents, we visited our auntie and uncles. That's where all the learning and everything took place. So a home visiting program just made a lot of sense to us. And we went from 2 programs in 1992 to 55 Aboriginal infant development programs in BC and 3 Métis programs in BC. So we have around 212 frontline workers that do the family-centered home-based program, which was difficult during the pandemic, but we didn't ever abandon our families. And so we see children from newborn up to age 5 until they start kindergarten. And the reason for that is because we didn't have Head Start programs yet in 92. We had them in 95 and 98. And we said, well, we're not going to see them till they're 3 and then have a 2-year gap before they start kindergarten. So we've just always gone up to age 5. So it's home-based. The child doesn't have to have a disability or a delay. It can be for parenting reasons. It can be just for support. So there doesn't need to be a diagnosis. We've never needed a diagnosis. And that's what we do. We visit families in the home. Or if they're not comfortable with that, then they can visit us in our office, or we can visit them in the park, or we can visit at the playground in a McDonald's. We don't care where the home visit is. We just do it one-on-one. So in 30 years, we average about 1,800 children a year that we visit. That's probably gone down last year because of the pandemic. We haven't done our data collection yet for a couple of reasons, but that's what we are. And we're proud to celebrate 30 years, given the fact that funding has never been enough or secure, or we've had change in the federal government, we've had change in provincial governments, we've had change in our own First Nations leadership, that we've managed to survive for 30 years and continue to support children and families. And our main goal, I think something I was saying a few days ago to my colleagues, I give the credit to Diane Melvin, who I think said it at a conference in about 2005, was if you mother the mother, you mother the child. And that's what we've done. And we realized early on in AIDP that the parents we were seeing were parented by residential school survivors who were parented or not parented in an institution. So we discovered early on that we had to work with that. So when we say our tagline for AIDP is cherishing each and every child, And then we've also said mother the mother, mother the child, or parent the parent, you parent the child. So our focus isn't just child development, it's really family development too.
Great. Thank you so much for that.
Mhm.
There is one question here that someone's posted. How do you see a role in educating Indigenous clients about the ACEs, as well as strategies to help overcome high ACE scores that are culturally appropriate?
Well, first of all, I would say find Indigenous people to do the training. I think some of you are in Saskatchewan, some of you are in BC. We have Indigenous folks that work in the post-secondary, whether it's in social work or child and youth care or education. I would say work with an Indigenous person, work with that kind of philosophy, and then they could see how it fits. Like, I wasn't offended by the ACEs. I was never offended by the ages and stages questionnaire that we use for developmental screening. It's how we use it, how we practice using it, and how we engage with the family. So I've always said it's never the tool, it's how you use the tool, and it's who uses the tool. So I would really work with some Indigenous folks. Some of you might know the name Margot Greenwood. Obviously, many of you might know Cindy Blackstock, although she'd be very busy. But we have people who work at UBC who are Indigenous, Nicola Valley Institute of Technology, Camosun College, University of Victoria. I would say you could get a group of folks together and have some kind of a circle of experts to talk about it, to pull out the good things and to see what needs to not change, but maybe adapt or enrich or enhance the tool and how it's used and how it's introduced.
Great. Thank you for that suggestion. So there is a comment and question in the chat box. I'll just read. It says, thank you so much for your presentation. Very inclusive for us non-Indigenous folks. I believe that the home-based services are so, extra O's, important. I consult to clinicians who may have had to call the ministry instead of the First Nations family service worker due to children being not protected. How do we work respectfully and promote follow through of safety planning for these beautiful little ones?
That's a huge question. And I do get asked that a lot. Again, I think so many nations are taking over their child protection policies and laws. They're in progress in many nations in BC. And there are Indigenous child and family services. Again, it's how it's done. It's deficit based. It's, you are a bad mom, you're a violent dad. There's so many ways we can still approach families, respecting them where they're at. Again, I say that a lot, but that is family-centered practice. And working with that. And, you know, as soon as they find out why, they might usually understand. Then they won't come in with a chip on their shoulders, or they won't come in like my dad, out of anger or fear. They'll come out of and listening. I mean, one of the considerations I wanted to, you know, stress was finding out where they're at and listening. So an example, if I can give a quick example of that. Oh, which one should I use? Children were threatened to be removed from their family because they were accused of neglecting their children because they weren't going to the dentist. And the 2-year-old had a very, very bad baby bottle tooth decay or dental caries. And the other kids had dental problems. And so the dentist phoned the social work, phoned Child Protective Services and said, I have to report these families. They've missed this many appointments. Now it's a health issue. I'm concerned for their safety. They're not getting their health needs looked after. So after that, the social worker decided to phone the public health nurse at that nation and say, okay, this is a situation, they're not doing this, they're not, can you help? So that public health nurse got a hold of the AIDP consultant and said, okay, this is the situation. So I think there needs to be some education and something like that. So out of the dentist, the social worker, the public health nurse, and the AIDP consultant, it actually was the AIDP consultant who had the best safe relationship with that family. She did a home visit one time and she saw the poor little baby's gums were so red and so swollen and sore. She just said to the mom and dad, oh, he must have a really hard time eating. His mouth is so sore. And the mom just said, oh my God, I just thought he was being fussy. I just thought he was a fussy eater. I didn't know. So that you see right off the bat, they're taking the children away with the mother not even understanding, and the dad. So it turns out mom and dad were both residential school survivors. They both had terrible, terrible dental hygiene themselves. They had no dental hygiene in the residential schools. The poor dad only had about 2 or 3 teeth, and the mom had all her teeth taken out, but she wasn't comfortable with her dentures, so she didn't wear them. So their horrendous experience with dental or lack of dental care in the residential school, they didn't want to have anything to do with the dentist for their children. And nobody really took the time to kind of say, okay, where is this coming from? And that AIDP consultant, all she said was, oh, it must be really hard for him to eat right now. His gums look so sore. So it went from the mom thinking he was a fussy eater to going, oh my gosh, I never even thought of that. That changed, right? That right there changed how the family would deal with the supports they got, including the dentist. And the dentist was so happy. All of the kids got their needs. There was 3 kids. All of the kids got up to date with their dental needs. Mom got fitted with a better set of dentures, and the dad had his 3 or 4 teeth removed and again put into dentures. And the kids went to the dentist every 6 months after that. But that was like a group of 4 people working together for the best interest of the family, and somebody taking the time to just say something that wasn't judgmental or threatening to the parents. Like they were used to people coming in and just threatening them. We're going to take your kids if you don't go to the dentist. The AIDP consultant got down on the floor and just made herself at home and, changed the atmosphere for the family. So I hope that answers that question a little bit by my examples.
Yes, that was great. Thank you. I think that really kind of makes it real for people to have those sorts of real life examples. So thank you. And Marilee commented that, so in other words, having the ministry workers truly make relationship with the First Nations family worker. And then thanks so much for that. There was another comment that I'll maybe just read that you might want to comment on is Tina Roberts says, I would really like to see the ACES questionnaire wording changes on the question of mother treated violently. Many fathers are treated with violence as well, but just now being talked about. I would really like to see it worded as parent or caregiver, male or female, treated violently.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You're right. And if, yeah, for sure. I've had that experience here in my home community where it was the father who was being verbally and emotionally abused and physically, and there's a whole different stigma to men being abused. So yeah, in this case, it would have been the father, not the mother.
Mm-hmm. There's another comment here that perhaps you might want to comment on. So thanks so much for your presentation. So I like the luggage visual. I understand that the visual is your experience. I'd just like to say that the trauma that is carried from generation to generation may not lessen as it goes down the line and may be just as traumatizing for the 7th generation, depending on how previous generations have been able to deal and cope with the trauma they endured.
Absolutely. And there's families like that. So I might have forgot to say that, but there are people who have never, who don't want to talk about it, who traumatized, who haven't dealt with it. So they're in their addictions, they're in their mental illness, they're in their, you know, even if it isn't that, it's existing. Like some people are just existing, and not living. So I totally agree. And I might have forgot to say that I was a fortunate one, but there are so many that aren't. And that's also kind of why I acknowledge that some people still have hate and rage, even after Canada's apology back, I think in 2008, and the Pope's apology yesterday. Some people, they're not healing and they don't have that capacity. And that's why I also say, you know, we talk about resilience, which it's a good thing, but for those that don't have the capacity, they're working so hard just to live day by day, that I'd like us to do something different and acknowledge that we have to support the folks that don't have that resiliency or that determination yet to heal and move forward for themselves, not just their children and grandchildren.
I'll jump in on that, Diana, because that's one of the things that a family place, part of the welcome was when a person came through the door, we're like, we didn't say it all the time out loud this way, but it's like, awesome, you're here. Meaning, that's so hard to get yourself together. There's so many things you have to do before you arrive to this program. And just that acknowledgement, right, of all that. And then there's a welcome space for you when you arrive. And I think if we are, in general, as we walk around in society, as we're in our programs, as we are in our families, that if we can allow people a little bit more grace and a little bit more generosity, for not working on something, it might just be way too hard for that person to work on this right now, right? And if you've had the ability and you've had the space and you've had the grace to work on things for yourself, then you could share that and let that spill over in a good way, and in influence in a positive way for other people. And then when you're not having a good day, then you know that you can just take some of that space for yourself. And I think if we just loosen up a little bit, and we're not demanding each other to quickly make changes, I think then we will, people would make a change quicker if you don't have the pressure on you, or you don't have the demand, like, and I think where this comes to practice would be when we do have our family get-togethers, because now everybody's there, and you might see that person again who is a little bit irritant for you. And I just think about letting people, well, off the hook, but just giving a little bit more grace in things, and if that extends the way we show up in our programming, I think then if you have a person who's come into your program and they may not have acknowledged to you that they're First Nations or Indigenous or Métis or Inuit, right? But if you ever just have a space where they can, you can just hold space for that person, then over time, they just may feel a little bit more comfortable on their own journey.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's great. Thank you so much. That, I think this conversation, for me at least, and I'm assuming others as well, has really kind of brought the presentation home in a way that is helpful. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I don't see any other questions at this point. I see comments about great examples, great presentation. Oh, here's one more. When I work rurally and I am training other clinicians, it is so important for them to welcome others more informally and sincerely. Clinicians are often trained in hospital settings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of folks go kind of to the medical model as a backdrop. And that's not always necessary. But yeah, I agree. They've changed some types of programs around here to be more of a medical model. IDP, like I said, has been around since the 70s. And then they decided to have a nurse family practitioner, which basically is the same as IDP. And they decided to build up maternal child health programs, which is basically the same as AIDP. And it's gone sort of towards a medical model. I think family-centered practice and cultural safety can create a really good philosophy and a really good basis for providing positive and safe programs and services.
And I think too, if we take a few giant steps backwards and we think about the system that we're in, right? We are in a colonized system that happened a few hundred years ago, but we do have that opportunity today to dismantle thread by thread the colonizing practices. And so that's the emerging work that I think you might have. That when you're, washing dishes or on a walk, you're like, I know what, I can change this part in my practice. And that could be the intake form. That could be the way you are doing intake. There's just so many ways. Like, think about how hard it is or easy for a person to come into your program. Are there barriers along the way, like physical even? And you just walk yourself through things. And so I think what Diana and I are talking about, it's not rocket science. This is heart. This is treating people kindly and with respect and value and actually joy and curiosity. I mean, I love meeting new people, and I'm like, oh, I didn't even think of it. I could do something that way, right? And it's just having a different point of view. Diana, did you have something there?
Nope.
Okay. Yeah.
That's great. One more thing popping up. Okay, the recording of the presentation will be available on the website next week. That's what it was. But I don't see any further questions. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, both Sherry and Diana. I think this has been a really informative, but also inspirational, I think is the most important thing.
Sure. Thank you. And I think the last thing that I'll say, as I said, there's so much we could have talked about, but the one thing I hope that when we think about our work and our work with Indigenous families is that we decolonize our thoughts. So if I leave anything, it's that. And we live in Canada, and I'm one of those folks. I wanted to just say, I don't, as a residential school survivor's daughter, I'm not into blaming anyone anymore. What's happened has happened. But what I would like to say is, I like to think of us all as neighbors. And there's a word in my language in Cowichan here, and it's called Aitstanas. Aitstanas, and that means good neighbor. So I think Sherry and I working together as an Indigenous and a non-Indigenous person, working towards the same goals and visions and hopes, that we are being good neighbors for our work with our children and families. So that is just my hope for everyone, that we can be Aitstanas.
And I love that, Diana. I love that so much, because it's something that we can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to live next door to a good neighbor, so I can be a good neighbor back, Yeah. And in our community connections and our partnerships, and we can even be good neighbors with the ministries, with the funders. We carry that. We have the opportunity to show up differently than what they may be experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for this time together. Thank you for taking time out of your summer to be here on the call. Yeah.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Lots of thank yous coming up in the chat. So very much appreciated.
Thanks.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions or comments, then I think we will end the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.